Sean, you're an atheist, you don't believe in God, you you see the laws of physics being able to explain the universe in both directions. We don't understand everything now, we've made enormous progress. In this worldview, is there any room for meaning or purpose, or are these words from another century?
I think there's plenty of room for meaning and purpose in worlds that are just governed by the laws of physics. I think that the common mistake that we tend to make is that we're used to meaning or purpose being imposed from outside. And we could say very similar things about morality or beauty or other judgmental kinds of questions. And according to the laws of physics, there is no outside to impose any meaning or purpose. The universe doesn't care what we do or what we succeed in doing. But that doesn't mean that I don't care. So I have no problem whatsoever imagining that meaning and purpose are things that we human beings invent. The analogy I like to use is like saying, it's as if someone came up to you and said, oh, you can't paint on that canvas because no one has drawn lines with little numbers telling you what colors go, right? Of course, if you had the lines and the colors given to you from outside, you could do the paint by numbers, but that doesn't prevent you from creating a great work of art.
Okay, but is this not just rationalization that you're saying we're creating our own meaning, and that has it's kind of a low-grade version of what there used to be meaning and purpose, whether it's an afterlife or approbation of God or whatever else. Are you creating a little substitute for that just to make yourself or others not think that you're just a crazy person?
Well, I think that it is true that our conception of meaning and purpose changes if we go from theism to naturalism. I wouldn't deny that. We are no longer given instructions from the outside. So it is at the very least up to us to create these things. But in no way would I denigrate the fact that meaning is only existing because I need to create it or someone else needs to create it. If I matter to another person, if another person is affected by something that I do in a positive way or a negative way, the fact of that impact, whether they are made better or worse or happier or sadder, doesn't get changed in any way by the existence of some sort of ineffable deity. It's a very human, very localized thing.
All right, so let's look at two different kinds of worlds. If what you're saying is true, the one world in which neither world has a God, but in one world, you have a recognition of the kind of meaning you're talking about, where you're creating meaning in your family or your wife or your kids, or talking to me here, that has some intrinsic value. And another world where that's just nonsense. And there really isn't meaning because there is no higher value. So there's really no meaning in that world. Is the universe made any different in either one of those two? The universe, you said, doesn't care. But is the universe different if there is real meaning created by human beings?
Yeah, I don't think that I would accept the existence of the universe where everything happens just like in our universe, but there's no meaning to it. I think that meaning is one of the words that we use to describe what happens in the universe. In other words, I wouldn't say that you're making a mistake if you chose to describe our universe using vocabulary that had meaning nowhere in it. If you just talked about physics, if you just talked about atoms and molecules and particles bumping into each other, that would not be wrong, but it is also not the only way to talk about our universe. We know that we can also talk about the universe in terms of people and planets and macroscopic objects, thermodynamics rather than statistical mechanics. So my argument would be that the vocabulary of meaning and purpose is a vocabulary of talking about the same stuff that we're talking about when we do physics, but talking about it in a very different way, a way that is more relevant to certain other concerns that we have.
I think you get yourself in trouble by using the word meaning and purpose. Maybe you want to have some mystery and excitement in life, which you can't have if you don't have a God, so you have to reintroduce it. You get yourself in trouble because if you allow your kind of universe to have the opportunity for even creatures like us to create meaning and purpose, that's a special kind of universe. And so you're allowing a universe that can have within it some kind of meaning and purpose, as opposed to a very consistent system where you say, look, face it, suck it up, there's no meaning, no purpose.
I don't think it is a different kind of universe, one that is allowing for the creation of this kind of purpose and meaning, because I think that the reason you might suspect it is because we are trying to think of meaning and purpose as like separate kinds of things that you have to add to the universe. But that's exactly what I'm saying is not true. Think of how we talked about heat back in the 18th century. They thought that heat was a thing. It was a fluid called caloric, and you could move from place to place, and the heat balances out and so forth. And now we know better. There is no thing called heat or caloric. It's a way of talking about the motions of the atoms and the molecules.
Right.
I'm saying that purpose and meaning are ways of talking about things that happen in human life. Any person who has wants or desires brings meaning into existence. They care about what happens in the world. So the question, is there meaning in the world? Is just the question, are there human beings who care about things? And the answer is obviously yes.
So you're not making any distinction whatsoever in an ontological way in the deep nature of things between those who would say there is no meaning and there is no purpose, because you're using the terms in a completely different way.
No, I'm saying that what we meant all along, even though we didn't know it, was something that has an absolutely naturalistic explanation. Just like when they realized that heat was the average kinetic energy of molecules, they didn't say, oh, heat is an illusion. There was never any such thing as heat. We were wrong to think about heat. No, it was just that we understand what we mean better now. I don't think that there's any new thing that is being introduced. I think we realize that when I care about what happens in the world, when I want to make the world a better place, when it means something to me to achieve something or to make something happen, that's just a description of my molecules doing things.
But that is entirely the physical process of a deterministic world in some deep physical way. So
that is also
consciousness,
true, yes.
all of that is part of that same system.
That's right.
So those who would not use meaning and purpose, who would reject those terms, you would have no ontological difference with those people. You're just defining some superficialities with other kinds of terms.
I wouldn't call them superficialities. I think that the people who try to say there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no free will, for example, they would be on equally strong grounds to say there's no temperature, there's no heat, there's no entropy, because these are just descriptions of things that we now really know are molecules. The world appears to us in layers. We can talk about it at different layers of description, and there is a layer of description that is absolutely true and valid, and is a description whose vocabulary includes things like people and purposes and meanings and morality.
And so at each different level of the hierarchies of existence, you have different rules that are coming into play. And these are physical, naturalistic rules.
That's right.
But they still lend themselves to different kinds of terminology.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's just a truism. No one disagrees with that, right? I'm just pointing out that there are ways of talking about human desires and human purposes fits into that way of talking just as well as our talk about thermodynamics and statistical mechanics does.